We're now joined by Lana Payne, President of Unifor, this country's largest private sector union. Lana, thank you for taking the time.
Thanks for having me.
So here you have Mark Carney talking about how difficult the times ahead will be for Canadians. And it has me wondering, have you been in contact at all with any officials from the auto companies themselves? Because I'm wondering what they are saying to you as the head of Unifor.
Yeah, actually, last week I had meetings with all of them, given what we were likely facing on April 2nd, and now what we had dropped on us yesterday by President Trump, which are unjustified, unwarranted, and potentially illegal tariffs that he has placed on the Canadian auto industry and really on Canadian auto workers. And there's one thing at play here. He's trying to steal our jobs, and we're saying no way.
So what are the auto companies saying to you about that? Because they are under pressure from Trump to move operations south of the border.
Yeah, I mean, what I've been saying to them is that, we are in a situation where we have a job to do as a union, and that job is to protect every single auto job in this country, and we're going to do that. And they have to understand that they don't get to bargain our jobs or the Canadian footprint away with Trump. So I've been clear about that. And I have been clear to political leaders that if we have corporations, whether auto corporations or any corporation in Canada, that thinks that they can avoid tariffs by appeasing Trump and giving up or trying to dismantle production in Canada, we have to respond to that in a very big fashion, including what we say to companies who try to shift production out of Canada.
Okay, well, I'll get to the government side of that in a second. But when you say that to the automakers right now, what's the response from them? Do they acknowledge what you're saying? Are they receptive, or do they just listen and leave it at that?
I mean, the reality is they don't want these tariffs either. It disrupts the kind of supply chain that they've established, their line of business. But the reality is, I can't rely on this. I have to fight back in Canada to make sure that we're protecting this. They're going to be having discussions with Trump, and in the end, I hope that those discussions end well for Canadian workers. But I can't just sit back and do nothing and hope and pray that that happens. We have to make our position clear, not just to the automakers, but obviously to government and politicians. And we're in a federal election right now, and what a better time to get people to understand what's at stake.
Okay, dig into what you want from government, though, because if a company, if an automaker decides to move their operations south of the border to the United States, what really can a government do to stop that from happening?
Oh, they can do a lot because we buy in Canada 2 million vehicles a year. We only make about 1.5 million. The government can say to all these automakers right now, if you want to sell in Canada, you're going to build in Canada. And if you don't, there are going to be penalties for you to try and have access to the Canadian market. And the reality is Trump has put us in this position, and we have to do everything possible as a nation to protect this industry. We've had an auto industry in Canada for well over 100 years, long before Donald Trump, and we're going to have an auto industry long after Donald Trump. But right now, we have to do the right things to protect it and to protect the workers.
Okay. Now, the Globe and Mail has spoken to an unnamed Ontario official, and that person suggests, based on apparently a phone call between Premier Ford and Howard Lutnick, that the Canadian-made vehicles will be less affected by these tariffs than, say, vehicles made in other countries like China and South Korea. So perhaps a smaller tariff than 25%. Does that make it better at all?
No, because what can happen, first of all, I'll believe that when I see it. I've read the executive order that Trump put out yesterday, and that's not what's included in that. So we have to deal with the facts in front of us right now, and that's what's in the executive order. We're facing a tariff. And the reality is a big or small tariff is going to have an impact on the Canadian industry in all kinds of ways, including what happens with future investment, because you can be guaranteed that these companies are not going to put up with tariffs for the long term. We may have a short-term reprieve in some ways, but we will have a long-term bleed, and we will end up losing this industry if we don't act now to protect it.
Okay, now you were with Mr. Carney yesterday when news of the tariff broke. And when it comes to the workers you represent, to the message that you're sharing with us right here, that Canada needs to hit back hard and make sure that American automakers know the consequences of moving operations down south, I'm wondering about the reception your argument, your proposals are getting from the Liberal leader.
We actually had a really good discussion that had been arranged before these tariffs were dumped on us yesterday, and it was to talk about the trade situation. It was to talk about Canadian jobs and Canadian workers, and building a more resilient Canadian economy, because we have a lot that we can do. And obviously, our union has a position in terms of how the government can deal with this. We're going to be forceful in that position. And I know Mr. Carney has lots of other things to consider in this regard. But the reality is that it's clear, and I think he's been very clear about what he has said, that Canada's response will have to be strong, and that Canada will have to do everything that it can to protect Canadian workers. And we're going to hold him to that, as I expect that he expects that we would.
Yeah, well, and today we did hear from Mark Carney in his capacity as Prime Minister, saying that Canadians need to be ready, that the road ahead is not going to be an easy road. So if that's the message from the Prime Minister, what's your message right now to Canadian workers, Lana?
Well, the reality is that yes, the road will be rough. There's a lot we can do to protect Canadian workers. There's a lot we can do to build the Canadian economy, and we have to get on with doing that and showing, workers and all of Canadians that there's a confidence here that we can build. And I think you've heard from a number of people, including me, over many, many weeks now, that we have a lot of leverage, we have a lot of resources, and there is a lot that we can do, starting with industrial policy. All of the things that we haven't been doing, we can do now. But I would say in this moment, we are a union. And we know how to fight to protect workers, and we're going to do that. I have been very clear to the automakers. I've been very clear to many corporations right now. We're going to do everything as a union to protect these jobs. And I mean everything. And I think when I say that as a union leader, that collectively as an organization that represents working people, we know how to fight, and we're going to fight.
Lana Payne, always appreciate the time. Thank you for this.
Thank you.